So part of my recent call has been the quest for a new African origin story, a new African origin myth, a binding story that will it is an act. It's a willful act that can project the idea, the notion of the Africa of our souls, of our hearts, of our senses, of our dreams. Loving Africa, the continent has its passionate lovers, but the continent also has those who do not understand that it's a lovable continent, and that it is a powerful, beautiful continent, a continent that is in so many ways the center of the universe. The noises from the outside, from those who actually know what this continent is and means, but know it for themselves and assume in so many ways that actually they are the only custodians of these continents. We are actually in their way, and also we're in the way of the animals and in the way of the resources that are their entitlement. Those people understand just what his continent is. And I guess in my case, I had to travel. I've traveled the world. I don't think there's a single continent in the world I have not been to yet. And have understood by that traveling the sheer potency of that which we are called to be the custodians of. And the notion that we tend to forget as Africans, a lot of the time our conversations our conversations are so obsessed about the colonial experience and the colonial project. We forget that this is a continent that's the home of humanity. And there's a very rare responsibility of those of us who are privileged to be able to call this continent not just home, but to be able to know of this continent in our blood and in our hearts and in our souls. I do not claim to reclaim any story of this continent. The continent is its own story. My job is to be as witness and to open my senses, to receive and to explore and play with both the characters and the life of this world. And I'm talking about the continent as the world. I think I was suddenly struck by an awareness so long ago that when one reads the texts of people like Dussel and Walter Mignolo, you understand that the West, that which we call the West, the Occident, is a story. It was a world that was imagined into being, and then it becomes a story that we all end up living out of. And playing a role in the role that is assigned to us, which is about our diminution, our dehumanization. It's a role assigned to us, and how foolish are we that for too long we have played that role. We've fallen into the role in a play that has been scripted. And there's absolutely nothing, as we learn from China, nothing stopping us, the continent, our country, from writing another story of us, another African origin story. So there's an element both of play, to enter into the places, the interstices of African, both storying and belonging and history and futuring, is a joy. I'm always overwhelmed by the stories that I cannot tell, and the stories that come at me, and the sheer wonder and beauty of belonging to this place, to this continent. And I think once one sees it, you ask, how is it possible? How is it possible to open your heart to this place? Once you see it, once you stop hearing the voices of the malignant stranger, and you find the voices that are actually within, and the voices of the the ancestors that are still waiting. They are waiting, the echoes and resonances of the past. When you suddenly turn to the within and find those spaces of our telling, I don't think you can look elsewhere again. I've always written, even from when I was in school. I was a D student in maths, but an A student in anything that had to do with words, writing, yes, and language and composition. So I've always written. It's only that it became a career option after I went through what I call the privilege of losing the illusion of the world that I had constructed. Yeah, the social development thing. I was going to change the world through the whole kind of developmental Ponzi scheme, until it hit me that actually this is a lie. These are all smoke and mirrors and has absolutely nothing to do with our vision, our destiny, our fate, our life. And everything fell apart. But in that falling apart, the gift of the old gift made itself familiar to me, that of writing stories. I'm an artist kind of writer in that I believe that the story I tell people sometimes when I'm doing my very rare story intensive, my only loyalty is to the story. That others may draw whatever they can, infer whatever they need from the story, and that's up to them. That's good, and that means maybe I've done my job. But I write. I'm a witness. I also call myself not just a nomad on the continent, but also a witness of our beings, of our African beings and doings, and that also includes the malignant stranger that shows up with their dogmas and their Ponzi schemes and their magic tricks, and the terrible game that we have invested ourselves in called social development. And at some point you just want to ask, and it's not a criticism, but I've asked that question that I had to ask myself: just what is this development? What exactly is it? I assure you, I put 100 people in this room and ask them that question and ask them to whisper the answer. There'll be 400 different answers linked to it. Nobody understands it, and the moment something cannot be, if you want, cannot be described as the thing it is, please understand that somebody is playing a trick on you. But we don't understand that. And like I said, the noises and the infrastructure of the world of the social development scheme, it's an ancient one. It was the same civilizational scheme. At that time, it was the evangelical thing that we're bringing Christianity to an Africa that already had Christianity, that actually, the same Africa that provided, through people like Origen and others and St. Augustine, delivered Christianity to Europe. I think at the heart of it is something that I don't think the continent are very, are very conscious of. The idea that the 500-year war on Africa, that we euphemistically call colonialism, I call it the European age of atrocity, has never ended. We did have a flag-changing system in which we replaced old flags with new flags. And then, of course, the face of the colonial became faces that look like ours. But the system, colonialism, is a system and a structure, never was never dismantled and has never really changed. It has morphed its face. It has incorporated language, our language. It has, the language of liberation, but it has never changed. To understand, and I think that's why part of the reason I'm quite excited about what I'm hearing about what the thing called the Gen Z and millennial kind of uprising, or zeitgeist actually, I had to use the word zeitgeist, is suggesting the fact that they're speaking about economic and financial liberation, which actually hits at the core of what this war on Africa was always about. And social development, the thing we know as social development, was created as a structure to buttress the continuity the exploitation of African resources, the entitlement to African, lands, all of these things that the 500-year colonial project had set out to achieve. So to wake up to the reality that social development has never been about the continent. It's always been about preserving the Occidental idea of itself. Political liberation, economic liberation. I think liberation is one. But I think the challenge let me just call it what it is. The mistake is the assumption that it is only one pillar, political. You cannot have political without economic, without the security or military. You cannot have, liberation is not complete unless the whole has been achieved. And that includes also cultural liberation. Yes. So we got carried away by the raising of the flag and the pomp and pomp and circumstance. But those who dared to ask questions about what real liberation meant, like Patrice Lumumba, end up dead very, very quickly. And the kind of murder is so grotesque that it scares everybody. So there is an element of I know there was a generation, I'm thinking of my late father's generation, who was so fully aware of what needed to be done. But they're also so fully aware that the moment they articulated this, not only did their lives end, but the lives of their entire families were depleted. The evidence of what can be achieved by both strategic thinking and learning to keep our mouths shut is looking at what China has achieved. If you want to know of a country or a subcontinent, it's a very large country, a country that has every reason to have been, frozen in fear, it is China. But look what they achieved. Look what they have done, and look what they've done in a generation. And a lot of that has been done by by entering into the space, by asking themselves, by looking within and asking themselves questions. And I would want to ask the continent the same question that I think the Chinese also ask themselves. If we are a continent of such immense history, a long, long history, which we tend to forget. We keep talking about the continent's history as if it only begins with the Europeans, which is madness, which is an act of madness, A continent that is the origin of humanity. A continent with multiple civilizations and influences all over the universe. If we wake up to the consciousness of just who we are and who we are the custodians of, how is it possible that a plague-infested, murderous, bloodthirsty, tribalistic nation called a continent that was falling apart? Remember, they'd lost over 60% of their population because of rats and mice. The only continent, actually, that was conquered by rats and mice. How can this continent and its people conquer our worlds? Okay. And it's not a rhetorical question, because then you start to say, okay, these are people who are willing to kill. These are willing, not just willing to kill, they were willing to annihilate. Very few, no other culture in the history of the world, I think with certain exceptions, were willing to commit wholesale mass murder against a people they did not know. No other people. So to understand, we have not done enough work around reflecting just what were the values and elements and qualities of these people that were able then to achieve what they achieved in order to conquer an unconquerable continent. What are our weaknesses? And I can still see the weaknesses to this day: an excess of hospitality, an excess of faith in the person who comes in, and to understand. But I think for a lot of our cultures and peoples and nations and kingdoms, it was impossible that people existed who were not able to keep their word, or people who live through lies. So to open our minds to that and ask ourselves a lot of questions. And then another step would be to admit, what does it mean for a people when they lose their world completely? I don't think we've grieved enough. And I also believe that our broken and shamed ancestors have not been honored enough, or have not been appeased enough. We have not cried enough about what it meant to lose the continent and to lose our worldviews and lose our worlds. So I think we're people living in such extremes of shame and extremes of grief, with no space to actually. And I think that's the other thing. I was, like, say, looking at China, they were able to look at themselves and look at their hollows and look at their wounds and look at their ghosts. And through making peace with that, open the doors to their imagination, not just of the future. You cannot imagine the future without a grasp of and a habitation of the past. Notice I didn't say the present, but also to understand that, to start from that. And then from there, I think a lot of energy reemerges, a lot of imagination reveals itself. And then you start to operate in a kind of strategic way. And you admit, we're a continent at war. It's not the war in the Congo or the war in Sudan. It's a continent that the war against the continent has never been called off. And then to start thinking that way, what must we do in order to achieve victory in the battleground? I worry that, especially, I think that was the hollow of social development. It deals with what do you call it? A very anorexic, thin soup Africa. You understand? And it's an Africa that is in the fantasy of the Occidental delusional mind. It's an Africa that is always sub-Saharan and North African and MENAD. That's in perpetual division. And we might object to it, but that also exists. So that once we have a grasp of our Africas in their complexity, variety, and multipolarities, then we can strategize around a war plan, a winning plan. And those Africas include the 45 plus countries. I always include Lampedusa, or 54 plus countries. I always include Lampedusa. So I say 55, 56, and Western Sahara. Lampedusa is also an African country. I include Reunion and Mayotte as well. I call them the alienated African territories. You understand? So these are also Africas. These are alienated Africans, right? But I don't think, not even the AU has ever had that conversation that asks us that question. What is Africa? Where is Africa? And what does it mean to be African in the world? I reiterate that. It's not a conversation we've had. Not as I don't know if you ever had that conversation yourself. What does it? And a lot of the times we speak of Africa, but the Africa in my head is not the same as the Africa in yours. So part of my recent call has been the quest for a new African origin story, a new African origin myth, a binding story that will it is an act. It's a willful act that can project the idea, the notion of the Africa of our souls, of our hearts, of our senses, of our dreams. To write it into the stars, because that then we'd have a common story. The reality is we do not have a common story. We do not have a common African story. Not even the AU has a common African story for us. And that is a terrible, terrible gap. That is a most unfortunate gap. But because that means that others can slither in with their version and impose it on us and tell it to us. That's why IMF can write a financial plan for a country, and leaders do not question the madness of allowing this. It's insanity and it's contempt. But part of the responsibility of that is ours, that we have allowed it, not only allowed it, but also that we do not see what is outrageous, what is obscene about this. There's that, and then we buy into the social development BS, and treat it as dogma, as if it's a theological statement, without understanding it's just the imagination of some very mediocre people. But by some, again, acts of jiu-jitsu, it's always the terrified box keepers that end up rising into places of leadership. I almost think it's intended. I suspect that these are groomed. These pathetic individuals are groomed so that this long war can sustain itself. So these puppets complete the game, and those who go beyond who are not those puppets, will never quite get into a place where they can actually make drastic decisions or change the game or call the bluff of those who are actually so greatly dependent on our blindness, our muteness, our deafness. Unfortunately, we do not embed ourselves in history. Multipolarity is the norm rather than the exception. The 500 years of the West's interference in the multipolar world that pre-existed, and especially those of us who are from this region, Eastern Africa, and you're linked to the global monsoon complex. What can I say? The old band has come back together again. And it's the return to the norm. It's not the exception. The exception is what has happened in this in this interregnum, this vicious, brutal interregnum. So it's not new. And that's exactly why the West is reacting in the way it is. It's not new. And the power of the old multipolar worlds was its adaptability to the zeitgeist and the fluidities. I hope. BRICS is merely one of the manifestations. There's a hell of a lot more happening in other spaces, in between places. Like I say, the old band is getting together again. And the West, particularly America, is very, very much aware of it. It's for that reason that they have imposed themselves on what we call the Indian Ocean, but I call the Swahili Seas, or the global monsoon complex, with the notion of this idiotic notion of Indo-Pacific. And they've only done that so that they can reinsert themselves in a history to which they do not belong and they have no place. So it's part of the conversations the continent is not having. Our regions are not having. The gift of the age is the return of the global monsoon complex to us. But maybe it's the kind of leaders that we have. We refuse to engage the gift and to take our place. The whole imposition of, the invasion, the brutal invasion by the West that had been left out of global economic systems, so that they could dominate and seize and take hold of systems and structures that had been established by others. I remember that. There was very little invention. What was invented were laws so that these countries, these plundering countries, could benefit from that which they had stolen from others. So I worry when our what do you call it? And I think it's also deliberate. Our lack of, if you not connection to the deep history of the continent, and also its economic and trade histories, means that we think that what's unfolding right now is new, and treat it as if it's something new when it isn't at all. And China's already gestured to us, talking about the new Silk Road. They could also talk about the new global monsoon complex, which is, if we were clever, we would be saying the new global monsoon complex, because that centers us. So there's been a whole series of these generational eruptions. But what's different now is that this links also to what's happening elsewhere in the world. The fact that the whole kind of movement, the Palestinian cause, has found profound resonances in a new generation globally. And there are a generation that have it's not even about the BS that has gone on before. Some of the things, when you hear them, you hear what they're saying is, we're writing our future. These are future makers. These are world makers, right? They are also the children of the forces of technology. Whatever, and I think the Joe Kubuthi, the young philosopher, thinker, had told me several years, 5 years ago, that Yvonne, the generation that's coming is a generation that you will never understand. All those things that you think you are in control of or have experienced, he says, we have experienced it even more. You think that you are in control of the governance systems and structures of the world. We own the technology. Technology is our language in a way that it'll never be the language of the older generations. Because this generation, that generation have been given something that the rest of us never did not receive or were not able to receive. Will they be co-opted? They will be fought, because the old system must fight for its life, because this generation intends to uproot their lives. So they will fight back. That old system will fight back and will try to consume them. But they will get constipation, and they will not be able to swallow these guys. They are in the millions. This is another tribe, and it's transboundary and it's transnational. Whatever is happening, we do not have the words for it. Thank goodness, quite frankly. I'm moved when some of those voices that have emerged to articulate aspects of the cause are speaking so plainly about about their disgust. Oh, by the way, they're disgusted by the habits of our generations. They're disgusted. That's the other, you talked about emotion. They're disgusted by the gluttony and the greed. And it's a visceral disgust by that generation. So even if they could, they're not asking for the villa. They're asking for the gluttons to move out of the way. They're asking for their country. The villa they want is that of their country. And I love the fact that they have continent-wide conversations among and between themselves. And that generations across the continent are recognizing the same demoniacs in charge. So there's another consciousness that is emerging among them that we may not necessarily, as those of another generation, may not be able to give word to, and to give them space to name that moment, to name the time, because we've had our time, haven't we? And we might be bystanders, witnesses. We might make suggestions and say, look to Frantz Fanon, for example, or look to Césaire, or look to Amilcar Cabral. All right. But let them also have their Cabrals, have their Césaires, have their Fanons, who are emerging anyway from this thing, from this zeitgeist. And I know it's difficult to almost sit back and wait for them. We did not expect them. We did not anticipate their strategies. We do not know what they plan. But so far, so fascinating. You know, when you spoke earlier of a 500-year war that has never ended, the whole culmination, convergence in Israel-Palestine, and it's a microcosm of what nations underwent. It is the story of what nations underwent. A lot of people who underestimate what the so-called colonial, I call it the European age of atrocity. What did it mean? Now we can say, look at Palestine. The erasure of civilization, the erasure of institutions, the mass murder, the gaslighting, the rewriting of narratives upon the lives of those destroyed, the murder of children, the violation and dehumanization of human beings, and the screaming on top of that by the settler culture that they're doing this because they're civilized, or they're doing this because they are afraid, or they're doing this because they are. There's not a single African nation whose people resisting the invasion were not called terrorists. So it is nothing. It's back to the notion that either what's happening in Palestine right now is not new. But the thing is that it's the contemporary iteration of a 500-year story. Do you understand that? The idea of solidarity or what do you call it, or sympathy to the Palestinian cause by Africans it's not. I don't think it's even, that should not even be a question. The question is, we are in a common battlefield, fighting a war that has been without end, and it has had many, front lines. Right. And it's a common war, and it's not a war that any of our cultures sought or wanted. It was a war that was brought to us by those who frankly should have known better, and they should have been better human beings. And they should have understood that there is enough in the world for everyone. It's a moral war. It's not about solidarity, it's about humanity. What does it mean for me to be human? What does the humanity of the other mean for me? The humanity of the other means that I am also Palestinian. On the African continent, one topic that we do not talk about often enough, is just how miraculous it is for us to still be here. We haven't talked about the fact that diamonds are created out of extreme pressures, and no other continent in the world has experienced the type of pressure against its existence that this continent has. But the fact is, we are still here. But what does it then mean then that we are still here? What superpowers have we acquired? What new strengths? I don't want to use the word I dislike the word resilience, but what is the name of the thing that is within us? Who are we? Look at us. We are still here, and it's incredible. It's more than magical. It's incredible. We're the people who have come back from the dead. What does that mean then? What does that mean then? And why can't we inhabit that identity a little more? We don't talk enough about what does it mean to come back from the dead. I cannot and will not ever have a favorite quote, but because today is James Baldwin's 100th, he would have been his 100th year. I'm going to get a quote. I'm going to cite one of my favorite quotes from him. And this was from what do you call it? This is from The Fire Next Time. For nothing is fixed forever and ever. It is not fixed. The earth is always shifting. The light is always changing. The sea does not cease to grind down rock. Generations do not cease to be born, and we are responsible to them because we are the only witnesses they have. The sea rises, the light fails, lovers cling to each other, and children cling to us. The moment we cease to hold each other, the moment we break faith with one another, the sea engulfs us and the light goes out. Oh, that's easy. I'd have said, guys, hold back the political agitation. Let's organize ourselves to take over the financial and economic systems. This is actually where the monsters lurk. This is the labyrinth where the Minotaur lives. This is where the battle is.